Oh, well, hello everyone. I think I am live. I'm just going to double check. Yes, it does seem to be working. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Chris Attrell. I live in Shaunavon, Saskatchewan, and this is my first time doing this on YouTube. However, I've done this class over 1,000 times all over Western Canada. I'm just going to try to share my screen here. All right. So I started doing night photography in about 2010. And back in those days, it was really hard to do night photography with normal equipment. But because I live in the middle of nowhere, Saskatchewan, it wasn't really that hard because it's only a 5 minute drive to get to the country. But one thing about night photography, before we get into the technical parts, you do have to plan better. You can't just go out there in the middle of nowhere and start shooting. So before you go shooting at night, instead of just showing up at a location like these ones you're seeing in this video, you should go there during the day. You want to look for any hazards. Like there could be um, like holes in the ground from animals, nails. You also want to make sure that you're aware of any issues. Like if I show up at a place and there's a mama animal with babies, you probably don't want to show up there at night. If you're going to be on private property, like I do in some of these videos, you also want to be able to have permission. There's a lot of great night photography locations all over the place. Also, I forgot to mention during this video, if you do have a question, I am keeping an eye on my chat in case I see anything. Oh, and by the way, a couple of people said hi. Hello. Um, but take your safety very seriously. Also, as you know, when you're out in the middle of nowhere at night, there's going to be less services. Like in Southwest Saskatchewan, there's only one gas station open after 10 in all of Southwest Saskatchewan. So sometimes it can be hard to get your gas, food, water. I've never had any trouble with my night photography locations because I take my safety very seriously. And when you can, it's also better to have someone with you. So, also when you show up at night, when I get like I'm in a place like this that you're seeing right now on the screen, when I get out of my car, I make a lot of noise. I'm not a silent person. The reason why I get out of the car and make some noise, if there are any animals here and they hear you, they will avoid you. It's when you surprise them when you can get a lot of trouble. So if there's like a skunk or a raccoon or anything, they'll be gone. I've never had animal troubles. Oh, and it's so nice to see people watching from all over Canada and the US. Thanks for joining. Um, Also, weather conditions too. When you're shooting at night, you don't want to have a lot of wind. The temperature doesn't really matter. I can shoot at night until about minus 10 Celsius, or that's about 27 degrees Fahrenheit. Anything colder, then you got to take precautions for your camera. But if it's going to be a very windy night, your camera's going to be in a tripod. It's not good. Also, if it's going to be raining, that also means a lot of roads and rural areas could be muddy and very difficult for you to drive home. I've experienced that before. But yeah, otherwise, it's a very peaceful, calming experience even while you're shooting, I like to just take it in because it's so calm and so peaceful. I mean, it's a really enjoyable experience. So, with that, you don't need to have expensive equipment to do this. This is a 10-year-old picture taken with an average camera, average lens, and average tripod. Just when you have an exceptional subject with great lighting, you could do great pictures. I'm not going to show you my best pictures in this lesson because I don't want you to see the ones with my expensive. I now have a full frame camera with an expensive lens, but these old pictures still look great. I want to make sure everybody can get a shot like this their first time, and I'm not exaggerating. The hardest thing about night photography is staying up. The second hardest thing about night photography is operating your camera in the dark. That really is the hardest part because during the day you can see all the buttons and where the switches are. But as soon as it gets dark and you start hearing those creepy sounds all around you, it becomes a little bit more difficult. So basically, it's planning. That's the hardest thing. Now, you can get by with any entry level camera. Like this is an entry level Canon M50. Even this camera with the kit lens that came with it can do great night shots. It's nicer to have one that has live view, and we'll cover that in a few minutes. So you can see on the back of the camera. Anything about 2008 and older won't have that option. And for most night shots, you can get by with the kit lens that came with it. However, if you want to shoot the Milky Way or have a better experience with night photography, you do have the option to upgrade your lens to one of these wide angle, wide aperture lenses, but they usually start around $800 and up. But you don't need one. This is what you do when you get some experience and you want to get the Milky Way. And the best time for Milky Ways will be coming up like in May. Also, right now in the chat, I'm going to post a link. I took notes for this class. I got a little sheet because I do this class all the time. So you should be able to see right now a link to my Google Drive, and there'll be some notes with some cheat sheets on there as well. It's right now in the chat. If you can't download it there, just email me at chrisattrell@gmail.com. It's on my website, and I'll email it to you. Now for your tripod, what I recommend for your tripod is don't buy the cheapest tripod you can find. If you buy one of those $30 tripods, they can be so frustrating at night because you have to spin things and blah, blah. At least get one that's $90 or $100 or more. A ball head tripod, a good one, is going to cost you $200. But when you get a good quality tripod, you buy one and you never have to replace it. It should last you decades. But I really like the ball head tripods because they're easier to operate at night. A really cheap one can be a very frustrating experience. I do a lot of infield classes in Saskatchewan, and whenever somebody has one of those cheap ones, they take about 10 minutes to get set up. Yeah, and flashlights. We'll cover this at the end. But all you need is some cheap flashlights, and I have my whole kit here with me. At the end of class, I'm going to show you how I light these buildings. But anybody could have shot this with my lesson. If you were here on this location with me, as long as you prepared. And I've seen those people who will, all the time on Facebook, they'll be on location in the middle of nowhere on Facebook going, what settings do I use? How do I focus? It's kind of funny, but they should have taken my class. Okay, so before we do camera settings, this is probably the hardest. Oh yeah, I'm supposed to be here. I was clicking on the video. Okay. I'm going to teach you how to do what's called infinity focus. With infinity focus, that means everything's in focus. Some lenses, the expensive ones, will have an infinity ring somewhere on them that you can just line it up to the infinity ring. Most lenses do not have this, but that basically means everything's in focus except for the immediate 6 feet in front of you. And this was shot with a Canon M50 with the entry-level lens. And as you can see, everything is in focus. But when you do infinity, you see these tree branches are not in focus? That's because everything 6 feet, and this is just a rule of thumb, 6 feet and further will be in focus. Anything else won't. So there is a thing called a mathematical formula for all this, but I'm just going to use the rule of thumb because it does depend on different lenses, and I'm assuming you have a wide angle lens. When you're a beginner, don't use zoom lenses. The focusing is much harder. It takes a little bit of experience. Just keep your lens wide open, and an infinity focus will be very easy. You can't use autofocus at night. While some of the really expensive mirrorless cameras, you can actually do autofocus at night. I've tried it myself. But most of you are going to have to switch your lens to manual focus. So I'm going to switch out of here for 1 second. Oh yeah, no, right here. You see, for most lenses, but not all of them, you'll see a switch, autofocus, manual focus. You're going to have to switch this to manual focus. If you have a really modern mirrorless camera or even some DSLRs, they no longer have to switch on the lens. Some of them, you're going to see the manual focus switch right here on the directional pad. Even some cameras, you might have to Google it because you're going to have to go into the information button and look for focus mode. And when you're in focus mode, one of the options will be manual focus. So if you have a mirrorless, pretty much anything, Sony, Canon, Nikon, you're going to have to like read about how to do that on by Googling it. But it's not hard to do. Then you're in manual focus. Now, once you're in manual focus and you want to focus at night, if your camera does have live view, that's what allows you to see on the back of the camera. And most cameras, live view comes on automatically, like it's already there. But if yours doesn't, you're going to have to turn this on yourself. So think for Canon cameras on the back of your camera. What is the Canon one? LV, I think. Or it's just going to, yeah, Canons are going to be LV. No, Nikons are LV. And I think Canons, oh yeah, Canons, there's a button with a red dot beside it. Press that button and live view should come on. That allows you to see on the back of the camera. Once you have live view turned on and your camera's on a stable tripod, manually focusing at night is not hard as long as you can remember where the rings are. For most cameras, there's two rings. There's a zoom ring, so make sure you don't zoom in. Keep your lens wide open. Then there's usually another ring somewhere that things will go in and out of focus when you're playing with it. And you should be able to notice it on the back of your camera when you're focusing. It shouldn't be that hard. It's easier to focus at night on a tripod than it is to manually focus handheld during the day. But practice this a couple times before you even go out in the field, because once it gets dark, this process will be a bit harder. Now, here's the rule of thumb for getting infinity focus. And again, it's just a rule of thumb. Don't focus on something close to you. You want to focus on something approximately 30 feet away from you or further. And once you do, you're in infinity. If I would have held up a big bright flashlight and focused on this part of the house 20 feet from me, we would have had this area in focus, but the background may have been a little blurry. That's called the bokeh effect. I focus on this light source 5 kilometers away, or about 3 miles, by using this method. Camera on a tripod, turn live view on, manual focus, and focusing on that light source. That's generally how I do it. I've had a friend with me. My friend would have held a flashlight, and one of the friends I shoot with is actually in my class. I see her. Teresa's here. I've shot with her at night. One of us will hold a flashlight, and we'll get close to about 30 feet away and light something up, and then we'll take turns focusing on it. This is actually where most beginners have the most trouble, is the focusing part. It's hard once, but by the third time, this should be easy. I can get set up in about 30 seconds, but it gets even easier. For most cameras, when you're in live view, well, here's what it looks like at night. I filmed the back of my camera. You see how it's out of focus? Now I'm playing with my focus ring. I'm 3 kilometers away, or about almost 2 miles, and I'm focusing on those distant light sources. Do you see there's that moment in live view you can just tell when you're in focus? Yeah, so just practice this once or twice in your own environment. Then when you get to the field, you're already past the hard part. But it does get easier. When you're in live view, you can magnify your screen up to 10 times, depending on your camera. So once you have live view turned on and you're looking at the back of your camera, if you have a Canon camera, look for this button on the top right-hand corner. There's a magnification with it, or magnification glass right underneath it. For most Nikons, it's right here, somewhere on this side. Most Sonys and Fuji cameras, and I even think Olympus, their screen will automatically magnify when you play with the focus ring, so you don't have to do this. But the magnification means you can really get in there and focus on some details, because you want it to be as sharp as possible. So magnification when you have live view turned on. That way you don't have to use your zoom lens to zoom in when you want to focus. Keep it wide open and use magnification. Here's what it looks like. I filmed the back of my camera. My live view's turned on. So now I'm going to play with the focus ring and magnification. So there's my magnification. I magnify up to 8 times. Then you can use your directional pad and move around the screen. Then grab your focus ring. There. You only magnified the screen. You did not zoom in. It's just to help you focus. And believe me, people who actually take the time to learn to focus, everything else from here is much easier. I don't always focus on light sources 3, 5, 10 kilometers away. I do that sometimes. The most likely way for me to focus, however, is I went and got a big, beautiful flashlight. Like a big, beautiful, like $40, $50 good one. Because when you have a flashlight this bright, like not one of those cheap ones off Amazon, get a good one, hardware store. You can just light things 30 feet away from you or further. And if I had somebody with me, I would just get them to walk over there and hold something that I could focus on. But with a big, beautiful, bright flashlight, if you show up with one of these cute flashlights, yeah, you're not going to focus on something that far away. And if you hear meowing, it's just one of my cats. But yeah, oh yeah, here, yeah, I did play that. I'll play it again. This is what I usually do when I'm by myself. So that's why you should just get a bright flashlight. When you're manually focusing at night and you focus on something really close to you, you're going to get what's called the bouquet effect. Do you see how the stars here are out of focus? That's because this Lincoln is about 3 to 4 feet in front of me. By focusing something so close to me, we now have the bouquet effect. Oftentimes it happens when people close or get a picture this close and the sky's in focus. It's because they took two pictures and they stacked them in Photoshop. They have one for the vehicle and they take another for the sky and they patch them. I'm not against Photoshop. I don't use it, but that's how they do that. The thing is, now this one's exaggerated bokeh. I just use it for this class. A little bit of bokeh for your night shots is not bad as long as your subject is in focus. If your sky is perfectly in focus, but your subject is out, that's usually a lousy picture. So just make sure your subject is in focus. Plus, after you take your picture, your camera allows you, hit the play button, and then you can see your picture. You can use your magnification button again, and you can magnify the picture and scroll around with your directional pad once again to see if it's in focus. And I do that too. But practice focusing just in your own environment, like just go in your front yard or down the street. Just get the experience of doing this in the dark. And if you have any problems with your focusing, like even when it's dark out, then just have a friend hold their flashlight over you. Some of these more modern mirrorless cameras that have come out in the past couple of years have a feature what's called focus peaking. I don't have it in my class because there's not that many that have it. But if your camera has focus peaking, like one of those, you're going to have to Google your camera name. So let's say Canon M50 with the word focus peaking to learn how to activate it. But once you have it and you're playing with your focus ring, and when it's in manual focus, it'll put red highlights around everything, including the stars. It's an amazing feature, but very few cameras have it. All right, if you have any questions about focusing, you can just put it in the comment section or the chat section. I usually do this in classroom, so it's a little different. Okay, then once you feel like you've got the focusing part figured out and you've mastered that, the rest is super easy. I could teach this over the phone. You can't use auto mode, shutter. Well, you can use shutter mode, but I recommend manual mode. So on the top of your camera, switch this to M for manual. We're going to be setting ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. There's a lot of different opinions on the first setting we're going to talk about, which is the ISO. That stands for International Standards Organizations, which didn't exist, but it was basically this. It was the film you used to buy. If you're a pro, you used to buy 100 ISO or ASA film. 400 ISO or ASA film was what most of us bought because it was the everyday person one. But the lower this ISO number, the higher the quality image, less grain. You see there's no grain in this image? Really high ISOs are more sensitive, so it's a little bit grainier, but it doesn't mean it's bad. For most night photography, you're going to need a high ISO value for most pictures, not all the time. But you see, by using a lower ISO, I needed a 10-second exposure in order to shoot this. With a high ISO, I only needed a 2-second exposure. So what I'm going to give you is the ISO settings when you're a beginner. Once you've got more experience or a better lens, better camera, then start experimenting with the lower ISOs. Because my mirrorless Nikon Z6 II with the Sigma Art 1.4 lens that I own, I could easily shoot 400 all the time. But you see how even a high ISO picture like this one on the right, I like it better anyway. So this is just an opinion. So we're going to set your ISO to the easiest beginner night ISO for your first shot, which is going to be 3,200. You could, if you go to 6,400, it'll be double the brightness, but double the grain. If you get too low, your images will be too dark. 3,200 is just a very good, your first shot, getting some experience. I do recognize this would probably be overkill if it was full moon, but just use it anyway. Because operating your camera, like changing settings when it's pitch dark with creepy sounds all around you, it can be very difficult. So we're just going to set this to 3,200. For most Canons, there's usually an ISO button somewhere right on the camera. It'll literally just say ISO. Press that button and set it to 3,200. Almost every camera has it, except for Nikons. If you have a Nikon, you're going to have to do 2 steps. Don't use the ISO button on the camera unless you know how to use that one. You're going to have to press the menu button. Then once you're in the menu, look for the green camera and then scroll down to ISO sensitivity settings. It's called the photo shooting menu when you press the menu button. Right now, your camera is likely set to 100 and the auto is turned to on. For your night shot, change this to 3,200 and then come here and turn this off. You can't have this on for your night shots. And I think everybody else, you should have no trouble finding it. Old cameras may only go up to 1,600. Okay, so now your ISO is set. You're not going to change it for your first night shot. Next, we're going to change is the aperture value. The aperture is basically this. It's that iris in your lens. A wide aperture lets the most light into your camera. A narrow aperture restricts it. So for night photography, you want to open that aperture to the widest to let the most light into your camera. This is also regulated by your lens. The way they design it's very tricky. The lower the value, the wider the aperture. So if you've got one of these expensive, where does it go? The reason why this lens is so expensive is because the aperture goes to 1.4. Most kit lenses only go to 3.5. So that's 8 times more light comes into that lens than the kit lens that comes with these cameras. So the numbers usually look like this on your camera. F something, F5.6, F8, F11. This is the value you want to change. And unfortunately, it's a little bit tricky. The first thing you want to do, make sure your lens is all the way open, because if you zoomed in, you may not get the widest aperture. So open it wide. If you have a camera, like one of those cameras with 2 command dials, some of them have a command dial in the front and the back. If you have 2 of them, it's usually the command dial in the front that'll change the aperture value. Also, if you have touchscreen, like this camera, just look for the aperture value, say 5.6 f9, and you can just touch that value and change it here. If you have a camera with only 1 command dial, you're going to have to look for this. It looks just like this, plus, minus. It's usually like here, AV. It could be near the shutter button. Press and hold that button, and then spin your command dial. The command dial is that spinny wheel. You should be able to see it change there. You want to get it down to the lowest number possible, which is most likely going to be 3.5, but it might be f4 or f2.8. If you have a specialty lens, it could go down to 1.8 or f1.4. But just get the lowest value possible. And where are we now? Yeah, so you press and hold this button. Now let's press and hold, spin that command dial to change it down low, low, low. This camera goes down to 3.5. It's an old Canon Rebel. So see, it's set. So for your first shot, no matter what, those are the ISO and aperture values you're going to choose. ISO 3200 and at widest aperture possible, whatever yours goes down to. The only value you're going to change for your first night shot is going to be the shutter speed, because one of them will work. Like here, it's a full moon and it's snow on the ground. So this was a 5-second shutter speed night. If there was no moon and there was no snow, it may have been a 30-second night. There's going to be variables you can't control, like moon phase, cloud coverage, plus distance to a big city can make a difference as well. Out here in Saskatchewan, like this is the middle of nowhere. When there's no clouds, no snow, it's like super pitch dark here. So I shoot 30 seconds often. So we're going to change so the way to do this when you're a beginner, let's just get your camera set to 30 seconds. So once you're in manual mode, all you have to do now is change this command dial. You're going to see your values change. You're going to look like 1/100th of a second. Keep spinning this until, so actually I'll show you. I got a video here. I'll show you how to do it. But inches means symbols. So if you see 1/80th of a second, that's a fraction of a second. You want to keep spinning it down. There's 1/4, half. When it says 1 inch, that's 1 second. Let's go all the way till it says 30 seconds. It'll show you here in a second. Here's an example. You're only going to play with shutter speeds because here on a 75% moon night, okay, the moon's out 75%. My ISO set to 3200. My aperture is 3.5. So this was a 10-second exposure to get it perfect. When it was 5-second exposure, it was too dark. When I shot 30 seconds, see it overexposed? So it's either going to be 5 seconds, 8 seconds, 10, 13, 15, 20, 25, or 30. You've got 8 choices. So here's what it looks like. Most cameras are set by default to 1/125. So now I'm going to spin my command dial. That's the spinny wheel. See how it gets lower? There's 1/20th, 1/10th, 1/4, 1 second, 2 seconds. Just keep spinning it all the way up to 30. That's what your camera's going to be set. And guess what? This gets even easier. You don't have to drive out. You don't have to drive here to the creepy palace to do your camera settings. So before you've even left your house, just get your camera set up to ISO, you manual focus, aperture set, and you've got this set to 30 seconds. So that's what you do before you even leave the house. So that when you show up here, all you have to do is put your camera on the tripod, focus, turn the camera on, and hit the shutter button. You don't have to fool around. Because wait till it's pitch dark and you'll see what I mean by it. It's hard to change camera settings. And then don't worry about the night sky. Did you know you don't need to have a nice night event to get nice night shots? The best auroras I've ever shot happened on nights when I wasn't even trying to shoot the auroras. I'm just out here trying to shoot this at night, and then the auroras happen to come out, or you'll get a shooting star. The only thing that doesn't do well at night is when you have full moon and overcast. It just makes the pictures look daytime. But that's all you're going to do for your first shot. You're going to take the first one at 30 seconds. If it's overexposed, use your command dial and change it down to 25. If it's still overexposed, then try 20, then 15, 13, 10, 8, 6, and 5. One of them should work. Did you guys know, though, that 30 seconds at night lasts twice as long as 30 seconds during the day? So you're going to be taking a picture for 30 seconds. It's going to feel like forever. but one of them's going to work. Here's Moraine Lake on a full moon. So with those settings, see, it almost looks daytime already. So this only took 8 seconds because the widest I could go was f4. If you use these same settings in this same place on a night with no moon, you would barely even see the mountains. So that's why you just keep playing with the exposure. Also, when you're a beginner, it's probably best to go when there is a brighter moon instead of when it's like low moon, just for your first couple shots. Also, when you're shooting at night, your eyes adjust for the night sky. So what happens is you take a picture and it'll look perfect on the back of your camera. See this one on the right? That's what it's going to look like on your camera. But then when you get home, it's going to look darker, like this one here on the left. That's because your eyes have adjusted for the night sky. So if you're shooting at night, it looks like the one on the right. You might want to shoot another one with a longer exposure to have one that's overexposed. The goal for your first night shots, or even when you're experienced, is to overexpose them. I usually try to get 3 pictures. What I think it should be, one that's a little bit brighter, and then one that's a lot brighter. Because if you try to brighten a dark image in editing, it makes it very grainy and the image deteriorates. So just keep in mind about the overexposure problem, because you don't want to come home and have dark images. So these settings I just gave you, they're on that worksheet and I'll put it back in the chat in case there's anybody new here. All the cheat sheet information and the tips are on that Google document. Again, if you can't find them, just send them to me or email me and I will send you a copy. Okay. Also on your cheat sheet is the Milky Way document. There's different settings for Milky Way. This is when you're going to possibly have to upgrade your lens. You're going to need an aperture value of at least 2.8, but my favorite lens is 1.8. The Milky Way galactic core, when you're in the northern hemisphere, usually comes like end of April till about the end of September. If you're in the southern hemisphere, I'm not sure which months, but I assume it's the opposite. But my favorite month for shooting the Milky Way is when there's no moon in May. June and July and August are just as good. But the thing is with May, the galactic core is low on the horizon for most of the night. And usually the mosquitoes are still dead. So it's a great time to go shooting because mosquitoes at night are worse than the ones during the day. So May is my favorite time. It's in the east to southeast sky. So once it gets pitch dark, you can even see it with the naked eye once your eyes have adjusted. So those settings are on your cheat sheet too. Oh, someone's from Mexico. Hello. There's also one on there for auroras. I know that there's been a lot of huge aurora storms in the past year that you can even see these things as far south as Texas and Florida. But those ones are usually weak ones. If you're in an area where they're so bright you can see them moving above your head, I put settings on there for real auroras. 5 seconds is my favorite shutter speed because then you can see the movement in them. Anything past 10 seconds, your image will just turn into a green blob. If you have to increase your ISO, that's fine. But if you have weak auroras and you can just see some green, but you can't see the structure, just shoot as long as you have to. Use the settings I just taught you a few minutes ago, even though they're not going to look this robust. I live 45-minute drive from Montana, and we don't get aurora storms this bright that often. If you drive 4 hours north of here, you see them like this all the time. But you should already know how to shoot at night before you're going to do auroras. And hopefully there'll be another big storm. Also, another tip with auroras, if you live in a crowded area like Edmonton or Saskatoon where there's lots of people shooting them, don't go to the popular places anymore. There's too many people. They don't turn their headlights off. They got flashlights. Go find a nice, comfortable, safe place where nobody knows about. So those settings are on your cheat sheet, so you can come back to them later. And by the way, oh, someone asked you, what's your favorite 1.8 for your Z6 II? Okay, the Sigma Art series is amazing. You can get them at any camera store. But they make these for Nikons. Oh yeah, that's a mirrorless camera. The Sigma for mirrorless Nikons would be absolutely amazing. But the Sigma makes great ones. They make them for Sony's, Canons, and Nikon, Sony, Canon, yeah, maybe more. But not the Sigma night lenses are just amazing. They're expensive though. Sometimes you can buy them used. If you're buying a used lens from a camera store, they're not going to sell you a lemon. They're going to sell you a very good lens, like a used one. They won't sell crappy broken ones. I usually buy used when I can. Okay, so we're still going to cover painting with light here in a second, but before we do, there's a couple things you must do when you're done your night shooting. So let's pretend we were all shooting. Now it's time to go home. The first thing you do, grab all your stuff. When it's at nighttime, you're going to forget things. So I turn on my big, beautiful, bright flashlight. I use this for focusing. Also, if there is like an animal, never had to happen though. If there's like a bear or a cougar, I could just hit it with this, but I've never had to. But I also turn my flashlight on and I light my entire area because you're going to forget coffee mugs, lens caps, bags if you don't do it. So always, even if you're sure, turn your flashlight on and look around. It's a horrible feeling to drive all the way home and realize you left your bag of lenses back at, and you have to go get them. Second thing you do, when you're done, put your lens back to autofocus before you leave. Because if you don't do it now, you're going to forget tomorrow and have all these out of focus pictures. So when I'm done, I put my lens right back to autofocus. And the third thing you do before you go home, put your camera back to auto ISO, if that's what you were using. Just put it back whatever ISO we're using before if it's auto. So for Canons, that's your ISO button. Hit ISO, back to auto. For Nikons, you had the two-step. I'll go back and find that slide here. Nikon people had to turn their ISO on. Where is it? Oh, yes, this thing. For your night shot, this is what you have, 3,200, and this is off. Put your camera back to 100 and turn this on if that's where you had it before. If you do these three things before you go home, you're not going to have an issue with tomorrow you forgot. And that's a terrible feeling too. You don't want to do a grad photo shoot at 3,200 ISO, and I've done that before. Oh, and someone's from New York. Thanks for joining tonight. Yeah. So that's your camera settings. So again, the hard part's going to be focusing. The second hard thing is going to be operating your camera in the dark. Well, actually, the first hard thing is going to be staying up. So many times people want to go shoot at night, but by 9 o'clock, they already want to go to bed. So take advantage of the winter, if you can, when the sun goes down early. Because right now, if you're like in Arizona, the sun goes down at 5. In Saskatchewan, it doesn't even get dark till 11 in the middle of summer. Okay, and finally, we'll finish. We're way ahead of schedule, by the way. So if you have questions, just let me know. That's what happens when you have no actual students in the classroom. Okay, we'll finish off with some painting with light. And again, this is an old picture, about 10 years old, with an average camera, average lens, average tripod. Oh, and somebody asked what to do in the cold to protect your gear. I don't actually shoot in the cold because there's a big process. If you're going to shoot anything colder than about minus 10 Celsius, or let's just say 25 Fahrenheit, there's a process. You just Google it because you have to frozen camera, room temperature, then warmer process to not wreck it. And I just found it's just too big of a process or too much hassle. Plus, when it's minus 35 outside, I don't go out and do night shooting. I admire the people who do. Okay, so lighting, painting with light. This is now my favorite thing to do. I don't even care about the sky anymore. I just like lighting buildings. So this was back in the day, old ways of doing things, cheap things. So in this night, I got permission from the farmer to shoot here at night. I had a friend with me. She was going to be my helper. Because when you're doing this stuff, it's good to have two people because you could do way more. So my friend, she was going to go light the inside while I'm shooting the outside. I love the night sky. I find it very peaceful, and I love being out here. But my friend who was shooting with me, as soon as it got dark, she got terrified. She went home. That hippie couldn't handle it. It was just like too much for her. My brother's like that too. He lives in Columbus, Ohio. He's used to police, helicopters, people fighting. You know, Out here, it's very peaceful. My brother doesn't like it. So I'll tell you what she was supposed to do and what I had to do because I'm by myself. So this is the settings I just happened to use on this night back in those days. So we'll talk about the inside first. You notice on the inside, it's got that warm temperature. These tea lights are like 12 for $9 at Walmart. Most gift stores sell them. Like eight, there's like you get 12 of them, $8. That's just one tea light up there. One. So if you can't put a hippie in the attic to go light things up, I use these. So I literally will just turn this on and I'll just throw it in there because I'm by myself. I'm not going in there. You send a hippie to go do that. So in this case, I just threw one. That's one tea light. Sometimes you have to throw two, but don't go and risk your safety by going back and getting it. This is like 80 cents. But that's what it mostly do with tea lights. I also buy these. These are like $5 from hardware stores. You just turn it on and off. I like using these a lot too. What I don't do, I don't buy those $150 Lume Cube lights because if you put that in the attic, if you forget it, you just lost a $150 light. Some of them are, you hear creepy sounds. You may not want to go back inside and get it. So that is just one tea light. I like those things a lot. Now the outside. Back in these days, I had one crappy flashlight. Now I have three. I have the big, beautiful flashlight. I have a medium-sized flashlight. And I also buy these ones. They're all from hardware stores. These are like $8, but they have that focus beam on it. So you can, whoops. Oh, yeah, zoom in, zoom out. But back in those days, I had a crappy one. Here's a really important tip for lighting up buildings because you shouldn't just light from behind a camera. So in this picture, did you know I'm in the exposure the entire time? Once I pressed my shutter button, I walked halfway towards that house and then I grabbed this flashlight and I just lit it. I walk it through the exposure, getting halfway close to it, and I'm lighting it. As long as you keep moving and you wear reasonably dark, like don't wear bright colors, and just keep moving and don't light yourself. But I'm actually in there the entire time, walking through the exposure. If I stop for like 3 seconds, you would see like ghost me. But you can get it. You don't have to. But if you have a crappy flashlight, you can get up close and personal. Also, when I'm walking past this house and lighting it, make sure I get to see that. Okay. I am shaking the flashlight. This prevents the hot spotting. Hot spotting will leave like a beam that'll look really bright in one place. So I'm actually shaking the flashlight when I'm walking by. Also, don't do flat lighting. Flat lighting is when you aim it directly at the house. When I'm walking past it, my flashlight stays at an angle even while I'm shaking it. That way you see all the details in the subject. You see how in this picture, you can see the details very, very good. That's from angled lighting. Even if you're not in the exposure, once you press the shutter button, walk to your left or to your right and then light the subject with angled light. That's the biggest difference between most night photographers is how they light things. That's why this 10-year-old picture with an average camera, average lens, average tripod and lighting, but great subject with great lighting because of the angles, still looks good. I made a little video of me doing this. So I put this dome light and my average lens. So you see how by putting that dome light in the bus, that's how I lit the inside. And now I'm going to light it from the side. Oh, by the way, with this dome light, if you want to get a warm temperature, you can get cellophane wrap, like yellow cellophane wrap, and put it on here to give it a warm temperature. Or in this case, I just ate a bag of cheesy poofs, and then I put it in a cheesy poof bag. But you see, there's the picture. The arrow is where I stood. I hit the shutter button and walked to my right and lit the bus for about 2 or 3 seconds to light, give it an angled light, and that's the dome light inside the bus. It takes on average about 8 tries to get your lighting right. I can't tell you how long to light it because it depends on 3 things. How good your flashlight is, how close or far away you're standing, and with the material. If you're shooting a white painted church, you're not going to need as much light as a dead or a old building with no paint on it anymore. So there's three things that you have to take into consideration. So you're going to have to experiment. That's why having a friend with you will make this so much easier, because you can take turns. Here's what most night photographers used to do. Some of them still do. They'll light things like this. They're going to press the shutter button, stand behind a camera, and they're going to light things like this with their flashlight. Do you see the flat lighting? This is my test shot, just to make sure everything's in focus. But the lighting looks terrible because it's flat. I'm right behind the camera. Look what happens when you take the exact same shot, but this time you walk 25 feet to your left or 25 feet to your right, and then turn the flashlight on. Do you see what a huge difference the angled lighting makes? And again, average flashlights. You don't need anything expensive. You can if you want. A good place to get started are all these rural churches if you have them in your area, because one, there's a parking spot, not very many hazards, but it's so easy to light up white painted buildings. It's great for starting. This only took 2 seconds of flashlight. So here's me pretending I just took my own class. This is right here in Shaunavon. I do night photography classes here a couple times a year, but I just pretended I took my own class. I did my camera settings at home. I used my live view to focus on those distant lights you can see in the distance. Then you press the shutter button. And now I'm going to turn my flashlight on. I'm going to walk 25 feet to my right. Now I'm going to light this house. See the flashlight shaking? Now it took me 8 tries. I didn't just do it once. It took 8 tries to get this right. But that's how I lit from the angle. And here's the picture. Do you see how angled light, even in cloudy night, it still looks good. I shot this house better, but I just wanted to do it with literally the settings I just gave you. The light inside was too orange, but when you live in the middle of nowhere, you can't be choosy. For your first shot, you just want to get the joy and bliss of getting your first night shot that's in focus, well exposed, and looks good. You're not going to get a masterpiece your first time. But once you do it good, there's so many places to shoot at night. And it's such a wonderful experience. I even got that drone that's got a light on the bottom. So I flew the drone into the air and did this long exposure while the drone light's facing down. See how the angled of light? Technically, this is a bad picture. Do you see the high ISO values were too high and it's grainy? But nobody cares. It looks good because of good subject, good lighting, average equipment, average lens. So that's all you really need for lighting. There's lots of places. Also, when you're going to do painting with light and you're walking around, it's very important to get your big bright flashlight first and look at the ground where you're going to be walking, because you want to know where the hazards are. When you're painting with light and you're walking, it's hard to see what's on the ground. So plan that route first, because if you don't, you're going to get a picture of yourself finding the hazard. See, that's me. Now, I don't get hurt easy because I'm durable, but yeah, you end up getting pictures of yourself falling because you're in the exposure. But you don't want to hurt yourself doing this, so just be very, very careful. I guess you guys have already found my YouTube channel, and I hope you subscribed. I got a few lessons on there too, and I'll probably be doing more. Yeah, I'll probably do some more, like watching me shoot in field. But yeah, this class only went 50 minutes. It usually goes an hour and 10 minutes, but we went through this pretty good. I think this video will stay online after it's done. It's going to stay under my live section somewhere. So if you want to come back and watch it again, but I'll be here as long as people have questions. I'll just keep an eye on this chat thing. But I really hope you guys enjoyed this. That was my first one doing it on YouTube, and I can't tell you how thrilled I am that we had 44 people show up to watch this. I'm so happy. Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it. Oh, thanks, Teresa. Oh, thank you. Someone asked if I prefer 1.8 or 1.4 for night photography. My preference is actually f2. But I do 1.4. I think f2 over 1.8 and then 1.4. But yeah, I like f2. It seems to be sharper than those other apertures. But I'd definitely take 1.4 over 1.8. Thank you. Oh, okay. I'll do more. I want to do more live videos. Thank you. I love teaching. All right. Well, I guess there's no more questions. Thank you. Well, I really enjoyed this. Oh, someone's from Michigan. Thank you. My mom lives in Ohio. All right. Well, guys, have a good night. Thank you. Oh, someone asked if I'm doing in-person lessons in Central Alberta. Maybe, but probably not because Robert Scott Photography does them there. I just do them around Shaunavon because if it rains, I'm stuck out there. Oh, somebody asked about how do you get properties in Southwest permission for properties in Southwest Saskatchewan. It's just word of mouth. I just start asking people who live in the area who owns it. Everybody in Saskatchewan knows everybody. But the best way to get permission is just literally to park near the building that you want to shoot and just stay there and then ask people driving by. It's worked really good for years for me. But I do recognize it's very hard to do in higher density population areas. Thanks, Marvin. Yeah, and if you're ever around Shaunavon, Saskatchewan, I do these classes in field at a couple of these abandoned places in May and August. All right, well, have a good night, everybody, and thank you so much for joining. Oh, someone's got my book. Oh, how do I get it autographed? Send me an email and I'll tell you if I'm going to be in your area, Ed. Or you can mail it to me. I have 2 books published, by the way. Forgotten Saskatchewan and the Grain Elevator book. And maybe Route 66 next year. Boy, this was fun. All right. Well, good night, everyone. Thank you.